Welcome back to the deep dive.
Great to be here.
Okay, let's unpack this. Today we're diving deep into the intricate world of UK migration in 2025. It's a topic that's constantly in the headlines, right?
Constantly. It's hard to avoid.
Exactly.
Huh?
But we've gathered a really fascinating stack of sources. Everything
Yeah.
from government reports to news analyses to help us cut through the noise and truly understand what's happening.
Trying to get to the bottom of it all.
Yeah, that's the plan. Our mission for you, listening, is simple. We want to offer you a shortcut to being truly well-informed. We'll highlight the most important insights, maybe some surprising facts too,
Definitely some surprises in there.
so you can walk away with a clear, nuanced grasp of, well, one of the most pressing issues facing the UK right now.
And it truly is a complex picture, one that has certainly evolved significantly in recent years.
I can imagine. When we talk about UK migration, you really have to start with the historical context, don't you? Could you maybe walk us through that seismic shift that happened post-Brexit? Specifically, the end of free movement in January 2021 and the introduction of that points-based immigration system.
Absolutely. So the intent behind that shift was pretty clearly to gain more control over the numbers coming in.
Right, control the numbers.
But what's quite striking and perhaps a bit counterintuitive for many is that despite that explicit aim, annual net migration actually surged massively.
Surged, really.
Yeah, we saw figures like 764,000 in 2022.
764,000?
Yep. And then still very high, 685,000 in 2023.
Wow.
This outcome really highlights a critical insight. Policy intent, while important, often runs up against these powerful underlying global and economic forces, things that can defy predictions.
Like what kind of forces?
Well, the demand for labor in key sectors, for one, plus unfolding global crises. These prove to be, more influential than just the immediate tightening of borders.
That's a staggering figure, 764,000. Especially given the explicit aim to control numbers post-Brexit. So, okay, with those unexpected numbers, what kind of legislative responses have we seen from the government, say in 2023 and 2024? What were the key policy changes aimed at addressing this?
We've definitely seen significant legislative efforts trying to, well, grapple with it. For instance, the Illegal Migration Act, which became law in July 2023.
Okay, I remember that one.
That was designed specifically to block small boat arrivals by requiring detention and removal.
Right, detention and removal.
Then, of course, there's the highly scrutinized Rwanda plan from 2024, specifically intended to deter those illegal crossings.
The Rwanda plan, yeah. That's faced a lot of challenges, hasn't it?
Considerable legal and human rights challenges, yes. It's been very contentious.
So on one hand, efforts to curb irregular arrivals. Now we're seeing new developments, even in terms of the regular routes. What's this labor white paper from May 2025 proposing?
Right, so this new white paper signals a major push to tighten settlement rules. They're proposing a 10-year wait for settled status.
10 years. That's a long time.
It is. It also aims to raise the skill and salary thresholds for migrants and significantly restrict dependents, particularly for lower-skilled roles. It's another layer in this evolving policy landscape.
It certainly sounds like a dynamic situation, almost hard to keep up with. So what do the latest overall numbers tell us about total long-term migration? And just for our listeners, when we say net migration, what are we talking about?
Good point. Net migration is basically the difference between the number of people arriving to live here long-term and the number of people leaving long-term.
Got it. Arriving minus leaving. So the latest figures.
Looking at the latest figures, for the year ending December 2024, around 948,000 people arrived. Now, that's actually a decrease from the 1.2 million in 2023.
Okay, so a decrease there.
And net migration was 431,000 in that period. That's significantly down from the 860,000 the prior year.
So down quite a bit from the peak.
Yes, but, and this is where it gets tricky, it's worth noting the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, reported net migration at around 728,000 for the year ending June 2024. That was after a 20% drop from the previous period.
Huh. So different time frames, slightly different numbers.
Exactly. It truly is a complex, fluctuating picture.
It sounds like chasing a moving target. How challenging is it just from an analytical perspective to even get a firm grasp on these numbers, given how quickly they change and how many different data points are being reported?
Oh, it's incredibly challenging. Each set of figures captures a slightly different time frame, right?
Right.
And they might use slightly different methodologies,
Okay.
which is why we often see these variations. It just signals a really dynamic situation where various factors are all at play simultaneously. Makes it very hard to predict a single stable trajectory.
Right. Makes sense. So if that's the overall picture, kind of messy and fluctuating,
Yeah.
what does this all mean when we look at how people are arriving in the UK? Let's try and break it down by the different routes they take.
Okay, yeah. If we look at the official visa routes, the figures from March 2025 show approximately 192,000 work visas.
192,000 work visas. How does that compare?
That's actually a 39% decrease from 2024.
Wow, quite a drop.
Yeah. And student visas were around 403,000. That's a 10% decrease from 2024.
Okay, so both down.
Both down.
Lovely.
But what's critical here is that study and work routes taken together accounted for about 81% of all non-visitor journeys to the UK in 2024.
81%. So the vast majority are still arriving through these official channels.
Exactly. Despite all the focus elsewhere sometimes, the bulk is through work and study.
Okay, so while the official visa routes are one part of the story, another, often very highly publicized aspect is the situation with small boat arrivals.
The channel crossings.
Yeah. What do the latest figures tell us here? Because this seems to be where a lot of the political heat is.
The numbers for small boats are quite stark. We saw a record rise, 38,023 small boat arrivals in the year ending March 2025.
38,000, a record.
A record for that 12-month period, yeah. Now, that's a 22% increase compared to the previous year, 2024, though interestingly, it's still 17% below the peak we saw back in 2022.
Okay, so up year on year, but not hitting that absolute highest peak.
Correct. And if we zoom in just on the first half of 2025, there were around 20,000 arrivals. That's a 47% year-on-year increase.
47%. That's a huge jump for just 6 months.
It is. More specifically, just by April 2025, we'd already seen 8,064 crossings. Compare that to 7,567 in the same period in 2024 and 5,946 in 2023. It shows a continued high trend, especially early in the year.
It's really striking how those numbers continue to climb, despite all the policy focus. What also stands out, and you touched on this earlier, is how the origin countries for these small boat journeys have shifted over time. It's not a static picture at all, is it?
That's absolutely right. It changes quite dramatically sometimes. For the year ending March 2025, the top origins for small boat arrivals were Afghanistan. That was 5,766 individuals.
Afghanistan, okay.
Followed by Syria at 4,368, and then Eritrea with 4,229. Iran and Sudan also featured prominently.
So Afghanistan, Syria, Eritrea, Iran, Sudan, that's the current picture. How does that contrast with previous years?
Well, it contrasts sharply. For example, Albania was the dominant nationality back in 2022. They accounted for 12,301 arrivals then.
12,000 Albanians, wow.
Huge number. But that number saw a really sharp decline down to only 626 in the year to March 2025.
That's a massive drop. What happened there?
Likely linked to specific bilateral agreements and returns policies focused on Albania. But while Albanian numbers dropped, we've noted this recent surge in Eritrean and Sudanese numbers.
Oh, okay.
Eritrean arrivals specifically were up 47% in early 2025 compared to 2024.
Right.
And another interesting one, Vietnamese arrivals actually peaked in early 2024. They made up about 17% of arrivals then, but they fell significantly after a UK-Vietnam cooperation agreement was put in place.
Fascinating. So these shifts really reflect a much broader geopolitical landscape, don't they? What are these changes in origin countries? From Albania to Afghanistan, Syria, Eritrea. Tell us about the global picture. What forces are at play beyond just the UK's borders?
They tell us a great deal. The root causes for this continued high migration, especially via small boats, are multifaceted. They're often directly linked to global instability.
Okay, so what are the main drivers?
First and foremost, global crises. That's a significant driver. We're seeing conflicts, repression, instability in places like Afghanistan, Syria, Eritrea, Sudan, Iran.
Countries you just listed as top origins.
Exactly. These aren't isolated incidents. They're creating desperate circumstances for millions of people, pushing them to leave.
And these desperate circumstances, tragically, I suppose, they create opportunities for criminal enterprises.
Precisely. Smuggling networks are a massive factor here. These organized crime routes, particularly coming from Africa and Asia, using not just small boats, but sometimes yachts, lorries, they're highly profitable, and they're growing more sophisticated.
Profitable and sophisticated.
They exploit vulnerabilities for immense financial gain. Then, of course, there are the pull factors within the UK itself, or at least the perceived pull factors.
Right. What are those?
Well, migrants often perceive maybe better asylum processes compared to elsewhere, perhaps more work opportunities. Some sources we looked at even mention things like temporary, high-paying cash-in-hand jobs, like £1,000 a week for delivery work.
£1,000 a week. Really?
That's what some reports suggest is being, well, perhaps advertised by smugglers. And maybe perceptions about housing availability. Smugglers, of course, capitalize on all this. They market often false hopes of quick gains and safety to potential migrants.
So, despite the UK's policy responses, the Illegal Migration Act, the Rwanda plan, the perception of opportunity and safety remains strong for many, and the smugglers are adept at exploiting that.
Mm-hmm.
What about the deterrents then? Are they proving effective as intended?
Well, the numbers suggest they're facing significant challenges. Despite the Illegal Migration Act and the Rwanda plan, small boat crossings, as we've seen, remain high. French patrols, for instance, they intercept some boats, but still under half of the crossings, according to the data. And even the UK's funding to French authorities seems to have a limited effect on the overall flow.
So the deterrents aren't fully stopping it?
Not completely, no. And finally, there's a degree of, let's say, policy lag and the continued existence of some compassionate routes. The newest labor policies, for instance, the ones we mentioned, tightening rules, they're only now phasing in.
Right, they take time to implement.
Exactly. And the tightening around skilled worker visas is still in transition, with specific visa categories still online. It just really highlights the complexity, doesn't it? It's not just one factor, but this whole confluence of global and local forces influencing the numbers.
It really does.
Yeah.
Okay, let's broaden our perspective a bit. If we connect this to the bigger picture, how does the UK's situation compare to other countries in Europe? Are they facing similar challenges, especially with irregular migration via sea?
That's a crucial comparison to make. The UK is somewhat unique in its high figures for small boat arrivals, specifically across the Channel.
Unique how?
Well, countries like France and Germany, while they certainly deal with significant overall migration pressures, they face fewer sea crossings of this specific nature. Their irregular migration challenges often manifest differently, maybe more through land borders.
Okay, so the Channel Road is particularly acute for the UK. What about overall net migration? How do we stack up there?
In terms of overall net migration, the UK, with that figure around 431,000 in 2024 we mentioned, that actually ranks among the highest in Europe.
One of the highest.
Yes. Germany and France, by contrast, typically see net migration more in the range of, say, 200,000 to 300,000 annually. So the UK's net figure has been comparatively higher recently.
Interesting perspective. Now, to really bring this information to life, numbers and policies are one thing, but the human element is another. Let's look at some examples, maybe some anecdotes from our sources. These individual stories often reveal so much about the broader trends and, frankly, the human stakes involved.
They truly are impactful, and they add a vital layer of understanding. We have some poignant stories from NGOs, for instance, about Eritrean children crossing, sometimes in boats that have been exposed to tear gas during attempts to deter them, reports of severe violence along their journey north.
That's awful. Eritrean children.
Yes. On the other hand, almost paradoxically, there's this striking image mentioned in some reports of migrants taking selfies in the dinghies, launching from places like Gravelines in France.
Selfies in the dinghy.
Yeah. It's described as almost a signal of hope, maybe defiance, even amidst such incredibly dangerous crossings.
Hope and defiance. Wow.
And then there's the stark evidence of the lucrative trafficking trade itself. We found reports citing smugglers charging exorbitant fees up to £12,000 per person, sometimes using yachts instead of dinghies for those who can pay more.
£12,000 per person.
Just underlines the money involved and the lengths people will go to and the exploitation inherent in the system.
These individual stories are profoundly powerful. When you hear details like Eritrean children crossing in tear gas-exposed boats, or smugglers charging £12,000 for a yacht crossing, how does that frame the data we've been discussing? What does it reveal about the human stakes, the underlying desperation driving these journeys?
I think it reveals that behind every single statistic, every number we've quoted, there's an individual story. Often one of extreme desperation, yes, but also resilience and vulnerability.
Right.
The exorbitant fees really highlight the ruthless profitability of these smuggling networks and the immense human cost of their operations. But the defiance in those selfies, conversely, speaks to this enduring hope for a safer, better life, even when facing immense danger. These aren't just numbers, they are lives navigating incredible hardship.
Absolutely. It's crucial to remember that. Okay, so let's try and summarize our deep dive for everyone listening. It seems like 2025 continues to see high numbers of both regular and irregular migrants arriving in the UK.
Yes, although long-term net migration has eased somewhat since those huge peaks back in 2022, 2023.
Right, eased but still high. And small boat crossings, they remain a significant and persistent problem. A record, approximately 38,000 in the year to March 2025 alone.
And that's largely driven by that combination of global conflict, increasingly sophisticated smuggling operations, and those perceived opportunities or pull factors in the UK.
And we've seen how the source countries have dramatically shifted. Remember Albania dominating in 2022, but now Afghans, Syrians, and Eritreans being most prominent today, really reflecting those global crises.
Exactly. And crucially, policy efforts are definitely ramping up new rules, new deterrents being attempted. But they have yet to fully suppress the flow.
It seems the pathways remain open, the smuggling networks adapt quickly, and those powerful global drivers we talked about, conflict, instability, they remain incredibly strong.
That seems to be the current state of play.
So, a final thought for you, our listener, as you reflect on all of this. Consider this. How do these shifting global dynamics and these national policies truly intersect with the very human stories of those seeking new beginnings? What's the biggest challenge you see in understanding this complex issue, especially when trying to balance the hard data with those individual experiences we touched upon?
It's a tough balance to strike.
It really is. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.